Ryan Hall is a candidate for Iowa City Council. He's running in District B, and the election is coming up on, I believe, November the 7th. So, Mr. Hall, if you could start by just giving us your elevator pitch about why you are running and what you perceive as the major issues in this campaign.
So, my name is Ryan Hall. I'm originally from the suburbs of Detroit, and I made my way to Iowa because I followed the path of a green energy job. So I took an AmeriCorps position up in Decorah and really loved the community up there and learned a lot about how we can do more for mitigating climate change, to do more for sustainability, and I think that Iowa City can really progress in that area. So I'm running for City Council because I think that it's important that new and young voices are present at the table and that they have an opportunity for leadership, to offer their vision and to offer their insight on where they think the future is moving and where we can be moving as a people. So I think that in this community we really have trouble with affordability, whether it's housing, transportation, food. A lot of folks I've spoken to don't have adequate access to housing, to public transportation, they've spoken to the fact that they live in food deserts where the food is far too expensive and kind of out of reach for a lot of folks. So I want to really bring in those new voices, bring in the concerns and the voices of lower income folks, of working people, because I myself am a working college student just trying to make ends meet, and it's pretty difficult here in Iowa City.
All right, I'm immediately struck by your use of the term food desert. What is a food desert, and where are they in the Iowa City area? Yeah,
so a food desert is a region in a community that doesn't have adequate access to healthy produce. So if you think about more on the west side, say Pheasant Ridge Apartments kind of live in a food desert. There's not a very accessible, affordable grocer nearby, and so it requires a lot of transportation and extra time and cost to try and even put a good meal together for themselves or their children or whoever they are providing for.
So they live a good distance from decent grocery stores, and they sometimes find it difficult to get to those stores. What would you propose as a solution that the city government could provide?
Yeah, so I think the city can do more in trying to allow permits for mobile food transportation. So that means having a better permit situation around food trucks, around mobile pantries. Iowa City has an amazing culture around volunteerism and about giving back to those in need. And I think we can expand on these mobile food pantries that are emerging to try and bring food to where people are instead of having to require people to travel so far to access an affordable food market. So if we have the resources, I think the city can do more to help out with the permit process, to expand transportation. We need to really rearrange it as it stands to increase our ridership and to maximize on our resources. And so we can do more for permits for transportation and to encourage more small and local grocers that may be able to provide a market for a healthier food economy. And I think that the Iowa City can have the incentives for more local and sustainable food production here in our city.
Okay, now I want to get back to transportation in a moment, but for now, let's talk about the permitting process. I am not terribly familiar with the way it stands now. Do you feel that the Iowa City government makes you jump through too many hoops to get permits to do this or that, or to start this or that business?
Well, I'm not all that familiar with the permitting process either, so I am a student of how the city hands out permits. But as I see it, I think that the city can do more to increase access and to make it more of a streamlined process, so not jump through too many bureaucratic hoops to try and make it possible.
And would you be talking about for-profit mobile food vendors and so on? Now, as I recall, Iowa City used to be just crawling with small mom and pop grocery stores. You'd find them not on every block, but on every other block. And these have practically disappeared. There may be one or two left in the city, but there seems to be, over the past 60 years or so, there seems to have been a drift toward consolidation. And perhaps that is one of the reasons why people, as you suggest, might have limited access to food. Would you be in favor of finding some way to revive these mom and pop grocery stores? Or do you think the future lies in, as you said, mobile grocery stores? And what would that look like?
Yeah, so I think about things from a sustainability perspective, and I don't know that having a mobile food pantry or a mobile food market is the most sustainable, but I do think that the city, by utilizing things like form-based code, trying expand on mixed-use buildings so that we can provide for more affordable housing while providing for first-floor businesses. And so we see this sort of walking away as we've kind of sprawled out. And I grew up in a suburb that was the result of sprawl in Detroit. And we see that as we sprawled out, our proximity to resources has also sprawled. And so I'm encouraged by on my block on College and Summit, I have a neighbor who runs a business out of their home, and it's providing microgreens. And so they're able to produce food locally, as local as possible. And it's a business on my block. And I think that we need to revert back to that, because as we've expanded, I think the natural kind of universal cycle is also expansion and contraction. I think that in order to make our communities more walkable, more livable, more sustainable, we need to encourage business growth at the most local level, which may be even out of our homes.
And I'm a big fan of small mom and pop type of businesses myself. How would the city government, encourage the growth of these small businesses? How would they make it easier for them to happen?
So I think we can really look at the existing incentives that we utilize. For instance, we use tax increment financing, or TIF, to encourage development, and it usually manifests as large, kind of very tall buildings in the downtown area, but I think that we can utilize our incentives at the city level to encourage small and local businesses so that we can spur economic growth at the most homegrown level, that we can offer this sort of equity that we've offered developers in the past to new and emerging businesses that may be able to pop up in our neighborhoods.
So if I'm living in a small house or in an apartment in a nearly 100% residential district, what incentives would you propose offering me?
So I would look at, because Iowa City has a AAA bond rating, we have a great place to invest, that I would be interested in looking at how the city can bring forth some equity in the form of maybe small business loans to an existing residential structure that could be converted as a business, and try to avoid some hoops and bureaucracy, such as if you want to run a kitchen out of your home. I think there are too many hoops to jump through to try and make that happen with health code and whatnot. And I think that we should lobby both the city, state, and federal to try and make this more possible, because we need more of an expansion of the most local economy, because it's been kind of a movement towards more big and corporate businesses, but that wealth doesn't circulate in our economy. The wealth that circulates in our economy the most would be the most local business that we can try and provide support for.
Now, I did promise you that we would get back to transportation, and you said that you think transportation in this city needs a considerable overhaul. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, so we have a lot of entities in our area, whether it's CAMBus, whether it's Coralville Transit, whether Iowa City, some neighborhoods or new developments have their own buses that they bus residents to and from, and that we're operating a lot of different buses with a lot of different institutions, with different organizations, and that what I would be interested in seeing is a collaboration amongst these organizations to try and build some sort of either county or regional sort of transit authority, because we can't be operating in silos when it comes to transportation. And beyond that, and it's a harder thing to do at the city level, but it's an easier thing to do from a community level. And so that part of the also reason why I'm running is because I think that a lot of our solutions come from a community perspective. If we're encouraging the community to rally around issues, to organize, and to collaborate with other leaders, organizations, and people in the community, we can really see a lot of change on these issues. But for Iowa City, I think it takes a study of our existing Iowa City public transportation to see where our inefficiencies are, where we can expand ridership, maybe contract to try and save money, but also expand ridership to Sundays or later at night where people are working second shift and don't have adequate transportation to get back home or to work. So I think at the city level we can do more to study how efficient we are in our transportation system.
And would you be in favor of some sort of merger of the Iowa City, Coralville, North Liberty, other transportation systems?
I would love to have that conversation about how we can collaborate together, because a lot of folks in this corridor, in this North Liberty, Coralville, Iowa City area, are traveling to and from for either work or for school or for what have you. And I think that offering better collaboration can really expand our public transportation in a more equitable way. But it is difficult because there are different funding streams for each city, and it's hard to cross them over. But I think that if we bring the right people to the table to have these difficult discussions, then I think we can really make some progress on the issue.
All right, fine. And you mentioned also at the top of this program that sustainability issues are very important for you.
Yes.
So could you tell me a little about what you think some of the problems are that are specific to Iowa City in terms of the environment, in terms of sustainability issues, and how would you address those problems?
Mm-hmm. So because I'm studying environmental planning at the university, I'm really interested in soil and water and energy. And I think that all three of these things can be improved upon both at our city level, at the university level, and within nonprofits and organizations that operate in our community. So there are a lot of great folks that work, such as Backyard Abundance, with residents to try and convert lawns to food production or more sustainable habitats to where we're avoiding as much runoff or kind of chemical load into our waterways. And so, I do believe that water is life and that we must protect it and that we must do more in order to secure that we have a healthy water future for our residents in Iowa City and for all those downstream from us. And so I would offer that I think we need to look down the road at our aging stormwater system in Iowa City and recognize that we're going to have to build enough revenue to afford a new stormwater system that is more cognizant of our water use, what goes into it, and how we utilize it as well. And so I'm really looking for the inefficiencies and trying to maximize on that. And because I'm in this soil lab right now at the university, I'm really interested in how we can utilize our green spaces, whether they're city property, whether it's university property, or whether it's private property, to try and convert these green spaces from aesthetic lawns to productive gardens, to rain gardens, to really high utility green spaces. And this is both a city level thing, but also a community level thing, like I spoke of earlier, about trying to bring the community around these issues. And as a student at the university, I want to push the university to invest a lot more in renewable energies, to have solar on our rooftops, to invest into larger scale renewable systems, to make our buildings the most efficient in the state, because I think that Iowa City and the University of Iowa can be real leaders in sustainability, and that as our classrooms kind of expand into the Iowa City community, like is being done with the Green Room right now, we can really have this collaborative relationship between the city and the university and the residents to try and build a more sustainable Iowa City.
Now you're talking about renovating or maybe just completely replacing the current stormwater system. What would that look like?
So I would refer to some engineers at HBK who do a lot of great work here locally about what kind of renovations and what kind of improvements that would look like. I'm very much still learning about how the stormwater system can get improved upon, but I'm also looking at the surface level, how we can improve on our surfaces as to avoid future cost burden. So I think about that a lot in efficiencies is trying to invest more in prevention, so that the flood in 2008 doesn't affect us nearly as poorly as it had done, and that we have systems in place to where we are avoiding this high cost of disaster, because we're going to see much more floods and natural disasters as a result of climate change, and I think that we really need to be prepared and conscious of that.
Now, you mentioned that, well, of course, it goes without saying this is going to cost money, and you had mentioned somehow augmenting the revenue stream to pay for all of this. In what ways would you propose to do that?
Yes, so revenue in Iowa City is difficult because a lot of it is out of our hands. A lot of it is governed by what happens at the state level in Des Moines. And so that's why I'm still interested in this community movement, to where we are encouraging folks to lobby Des Moines, to run for political office, to try and to vote, just to get civically engaged. And if we are able to kind of transform what Des Moines looks like and how they legislate almost specifically against Iowa City, then we'll be able to have more autonomy when it comes to revenue. So there are options like the local option sales tax, which I would pursue not as a high priority because of its regressive nature for lower income folks. They often bear the burden of a local option sales tax. And we're pretty much maxed out on our property tax as well. So it's going to be hard to come up with that revenue, but I think because I'm coming into Iowa City and the city's budget with fresh eyes, I can kind of look at, where are we spending perhaps an inefficient amount of money, and I'd like to find ways in it that we can save, and that we can really prepare ourselves for a future to where we're not going to be nearly as affected by disasters.
Okay, and you are relatively new to Iowa City. Can you tell us a little about where and how you grew up and what your background is and what brought you to Decorah first of all and then Iowa City later?
Yeah, so I come from a long line of auto workers who kind of moved to Detroit for the economic opportunity, and that was, mostly European immigrants. If you couldn't tell, I'm of very European descent. And so my grandparents had moved out from the core of Detroit and kept doing this kind of white flight out to the suburbs. So I grew up in a pretty cookie cutter neighborhood, it was once regarded as like the second whitest city with a population over 100,000 people.
What town is this?
This is Livonia, Michigan.
Okay.
So I grew up in a very homogeneous community, and it kind of, it offered a lot of great experience for me, but it also sheltered me in ways that I didn't think was most productive. And so I kind of pursued any sort of diversity or sort of an atypical kind of experience beyond that. So that is why
Something a little more exotic than Livonia.
Yeah, it wasn't exactly where I wanted to stay. And
so where did you go to college?
So I went to a community college called Schoolcraft for a year, and then I went to Albion College, which is in kind of the central south Michigan area.
Right.
Pretty rural community, hit hard when the collapse happened in '08. So I was unable to afford college after a couple of years. I took out too many in loans and wasn't in a sturdy enough financial situation. So that's when I went into AmeriCorps, to where I served for 3 years in 3 different capacities. So I jumped from Columbus, Ohio, being a tutor and a mentor in a public school that was pretty much a school-to-prison pipeline. I worked in Denver and mainly in Colorado, as mainly a wildland firefighter with the U.S. Forest Service. And then my 3rd year, I chose to come to Iowa. And I had a choice between either Cedar Rapids or Decorah. And I tried to tap some folks who I knew lived in Iowa, and they said that Decorah would be a better fit for me. And I'm glad I went. It was a beautiful small college town that is doing a lot of great things with renewable energy, with local food production.
That's right. They've got Luther College up there, right?
Yep, and they have one of the largest solar arrays in the state as a result of this partnership between an educational institution and a third-party investor, a local banker, who helped take the tax incentives for solar and is able to sell the power back to the college. And so eventually the college will own it, but it's in this kind of third-party purchasing agreement right now. And I think this is a wonderful model, especially when we think about how Iowa City, about the University of Iowa, cannot take full advantage of tax incentives as state or federally because of their tax status. And that if we find willing and philanthropist investors, which there are, we can help try and spur this sort of renewable energy growth that has been implemented at Luther College and various places throughout the country. And I think it's a great place to start for Iowa City.
And what brought you to Iowa City?
So I intentionally moved here following I took a cross-country bicycle trip to where I finished my service here in Decorah, and I traveled from the coast of Oregon to Washington, D.C. on a self-supported bicycle with a friend of mine, Mindy, who we were speaking about action on climate and trying to talk about a bipartisan climate solution in Congress called a carbon fee and dividend. So we would travel through communities throughout the U.S., either in coal country in Montana and West Virginia or rural Indiana, and trying to talk with folks about climate action as a sort of political solution. And I learned a lot about the struggle of trying to convert to a sustainable economy, about how we are very ingrained in a very fossil fuel heavy world and market, and it's difficult to make that transition, especially when you're talking to someone who's worked in coal for decades, and that is the only economic opportunity next to trying to wrangle cattle. But it's not a very lucrative position compared to going in the coal industry. So throughout this route, I learned a lot about our country, about its beauty, about its potential. And I wanted to pursue an education so that I could put myself in a place to where I could affect policy, build community, and try and make the change that I want to see in the world. And so I chose Iowa City because I once traveled through here on my way to South Dakota, where I traveled to Pine Ridge Indian Reservation and learned a lot about life and inequality, and about the importance of reverting back to our indigenous nature and protecting indigenous people. I traveled through Iowa City, and I stopped at Java House. I went to New Pie and had the most amazing vegan tofu sandwich, and it kind of changed my life. But I don't know if you've ever been somewhere and you thought, I might come back here. There's an energy to this place that really kind of pulls me in.
Oh yeah, I've long felt that the proper marketing slogan for Iowa City is "You'll probably die here."
Yes, and this is very true. A lot of folks return here because there is a gravity to this place, because we have a vibrant culture, a relatively strong economy, and a sort of community that is hard to find elsewhere. And so I was drawn to that sense of community, to the university, to the people that are here, and I'm very grateful to be in this community, because I think it's so great, and I love the people here and the potential that I think the community has.
And so in addition to being a politician, you're also a student here at the University of Iowa?
Yep, I'm a full-time student, a part-time worker, and it's a difficult balance, especially now trying to manage and run a campaign.
What's your major, and when do you intend to graduate?
So I'm currently a junior in my undergrad with environmental planning, which I'm trying to bridge the policy and the science and try to enact some sort of change in that regard. And I'll be here for another 2 years finishing my undergrad. But if elected, it's a 4-year position, and I got my eyes on grad school, and I'd like to enter into the urban and regional planning department.
Okay. And can you speak to what you perceive as the main differences between yourself and your opponents, Susan Mims?
So I respect the work that Susan Mims has done in the community and the service she's performed while on City Council for 8 years. I just think that it's time for the new generation, the younger generations, to be passed the baton for leadership and opportunity to offer a vision for this community. And I think with my experience in AmeriCorps and serving others and in learning a lot about how we can convert to a more sustainable community, I think that I have a lot to offer Iowa City in this vision, in this youthful idealism that I still have. And I think that I'm speaking with folks in the community that otherwise don't have a great presence in positions of power, and I want to see that their concerns and their voices get addressed at the City Council level. So I want to run for all people. I want to, bring issues to the forefront and provide a very grassroots, people-powered campaign that tries to lift people up and out of poverty and move Iowa City into a really productive, sustainable, equitable future that I know that it is completely capable of.
Now, with regard to people currently living in poverty, what concrete solutions do you suppose the city government could provide to help them get out of their condition?
Mm-hmm. So I think, and this is, it's a bigger issue than just Iowa City, that we need to really build a community movement around better paying jobs, about bringing our cost of living down, and providing for, like I spoke about, better food, better transportation, and better education. And I think that there are many ways to go about doing this, but at the City Council level, I'm really interested in how we can, like I said, transform our public transportation system, how we can provide more affordable housing in the way of following this 15-step plan that has been introduced at the city level. I want to see that get realized and have that be completed, and also offer new solutions like converting homes into cooperative housing models. So I live in a cooperative housing unit right now where we have kind of agency over our rent, our utilities, and our food purchasing. And I think that it's a great concept for having better access to control over one's housing and kind of place in our community.
And this is a completely voluntary arrangement, correct?
Well, yes, it'd be, so I'd be interested in how it can be implemented, like the Universe City program that converts rental units to owner-occupied. I'd be interested in seeing in ways that we can convert rental units into cooperative housing models, and try to utilize existing solutions to incorporate new and innovative solutions.
So would this work the way co-op systems work in New York City, for example, where residents will buy shares that equate to a certain apartment within that building?
Yeah, so I think it can take form differently. I think that the way that we have structured our cooperative model is that we sort of all throw our funds into a pool of rent, of utilities, of food, and are able to have democratic power over our over our decisions in the co-op, to where we have committees and we are essentially our landlords, and are able to make improvements to our housing, to make decisions that will affect our housing future. So it's similar to what you have spoken about in New York.
So would this take the form of residents approaching the owner of a rental building and saying, look, we'd like to buy you out, can you give us a price, and so on?
It may look like that, because there are some organizations, cooperative housing organizations, that are interested in purchasing housing units and converting them to cooperative living spaces.
Another point that I'm interested in is I am a little concerned with the lack of political activism in this town, which sounds kind of counterintuitive because one does see a lot of political activism here. But I go back a long time. I did some of my growing up in this town in the 1960s, and there was so much more interest in public affairs back then, it seems to me. Now it just comes from a small faction. Can you wrap up the show by telling us how you suggest people should get more involved in the political process?
Yeah, and I think that the solution a solution to that is trying to build a community by meeting people where they are at. I know that a lot of circles in Iowa City operate as echo chambers, to where we are kind of talking in circles with the same people, showing up to the same events, talking about the same things.
Boy, that is too terribly true, and I think on that point, that's a good point to wrap up the show. Ryan Hall, thank you very much for appearing on the show.
My pleasure.
Good luck to you, and thank you all.